There is a place on this earth where the jungle is so dense, so vast, and so deliberately silent that entire cities have disappeared inside it without a trace. Not ancient ruins slowly buried by time, not structures worn down by centuries of rain, cities with roads, with architecture, with populations in the millions gone, as if something decided they shouldn't be found. The Amazon covers nearly 3 million square miles. Scientists have formally explored less than 10% of it. And in that 10% alone, what they've uncovered has quietly rewritten everything we thought we understood about this planet. Before we go further, if you haven't subscribed, because where this goes, you'll want to have been here from the beginning. The Amazon is not simply a forest. It is the largest river system on Earth, home to tens of thousands of species that exist nowhere else, and a landmass so expansive that it generates its own weather. For most of recorded history, we assumed it was wilderness, untouched, primordial, indifferent to human presence. That assumption is now in serious doubt. What researchers have found, buried beneath the canopy, hidden in the soil, encoded in the rivers themselves, suggests something was here long before us, something organized, something vast, and whatever it was, it left very deliberately, very suddenly, and left almost nothing behind. Number 7. The river that boils there is a river in the Peruvian Amazon that boils not metaphorically, not poetically. The water temperature exceeds 91 degrees Celsius across 6 kilometers of continuous flow. Animals that fall in do not surface the same way they went under. The local name for it, Shanae, Timpishka, translates roughly to boiled with the heat of the sun. But the sun is not doing this. Geologist Androfes Russo spent years searching for a conventional explanation. The nearest volcanic activity is hundreds of kilometers away. No known geothermal system accounts for heat this intense, this sustained across this distance. When he published his findings, the scientific community didn't offer answers. It offered silence, followed by a quiet admission that no one could explain it. What makes this river genuinely unsettling isn't the temperature. It is the consistency. It doesn't fluctuate the way a natural thermal event would. It doesn't cool in the dry season or surge in the wet. It simply boils steadily, reliably, as if something beneath it has been maintaining it. Shamans in the region have known about this river for generations. They don't treat it as a curiosity. They treat it as a border, a line between where humans are permitted and where something else begins. Scientists dismissed it as folklore for decades. The folklore was 6 kilometers long and hot enough to dissolve flesh. If something this visible could hide inside a legend for centuries, the question isn't what else is concealed in the Amazon. The question is what else we've already been told about and chosen not to believe. And directly above this river, buried under a canopy so thick that sunlight never reaches the ground, something far larger has been waiting to be found. Number 6. Cities beneath the canopy. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists believed the Amazon was too hostile, too nutrient, poor, too unstable to have ever supported a large, organized civilization. The jungle, they argued, simply wouldn't allow it. That position held for decades. Then, in the early 2000s, researchers began mounting LiDAR scanners onto aircraft, technology that fires millions of laser pulses through the canopy and maps whatever lies beneath. What came back rewrote the entire field. Beneath the jungle floor, invisible to any ground expedition, were cities, not scattered settlements, not simple villages, fully planned urban systems, with roads laid in precise grids, ceremonial plazas, irrigation networks, and pyramid structures, some covering areas larger than modern European capitals. In the upper Amazon basin alone, researchers identified over 10,000 individual structures across a region spanning more than 1,000 kilometers. These cities were not primitive. The engineering required to construct them in terrain this difficult, at this scale, implies centuries of accumulated knowledge, organized labor in the hundreds of thousands, and a level of social complexity we had simply refused to assign to Amazonian peoples, and yet no explorer ever found them. No colonial account ever described them. No oral tradition preserved their names. They were there, enormous, unmistakable from above, and somehow completely invisible for 500 years of documented human presence in the region. The cities didn't vanish. We just never looked in the right direction. But here is where it becomes uncomfortable, because these cities didn't empty slowly. The people who built them, millions of them, disappeared within a single generation. No gradual decline, no evidence of prolonged war, no slow abandonment, just absence. And the forts that came after them, built by the Europeans who arrived to claim this land, didn't last much longer. Number 5. The forts that vanished. Claude responded when European colonial powers moved into the Amazon basin. They built to last. When European colonial powers moved into the Amazon basin, they built to last stone fortifications, timber garrisons, documented outposts with supply lines, military personnel, and detailed records filed back to Lisbon and Madrid. These were not temporary camps. They were permanent claims on permanent ground within 200 years. Most of them were gone. Not captured, not demolished, not repurposed. Gone as in the structures themselves ceased to exist. Archaeologists searching for colonial-era fortifications in regions with extensive historical documentation have found, in many cases, nothing. No foundation stones, no collapsed walls, no debris fields. The jungle didn't just grow over them, it consumed them entirely, as if they had never been placed there at all. This is not standard decay. Stone does not dissolve in 2 centuries. Brick does not vanish. Even wooden structures leave soil signatures, chemical traces that persist for thousands of years under proper analysis. In several documented cases, those signatures are absent. The ground holds no memory of what stood there. There is a particular fort in the western Amazon, recorded in 3 separate colonial documents, photographed in sketch form by 2 independent cartographers, and referenced in military dispatches as recently as the early 19th century. Its precise coordinates are known. Expeditions have gone there. What they found was unbroken jungle and soil that, according to ground-penetrating analysis, had never been disturbed. If you were standing in that clearing, this is where the silence would feel wrong. The colonial powers who built these structures were not careless. They were not inexperienced. They had spent centuries constructing permanent settlements across 2 continents, and the Amazon erased them so completely that we cannot find the evidence they ever existed. Something in this forest does not preserve what is placed inside it. Something actively returns the jungle to a state before human interference. And when you learn what is moving through that same jungle at night, the silence starts to carry a different weight entirely. Everything up to this point has an explanation, incomplete, uncomfortable, but still within the boundaries of what science is willing to discuss openly. What comes next does not have that comfort. The tone of the research changes here. The language in the academic papers becomes more careful. The expedition reports become shorter. And in several cases, the researchers themselves stopped. What was found in the deeper Amazon didn't just challenge existing theory. It challenged the assumption that we are the ones doing the observing. Number 4. The forest that watches back. In 2019, the Brazilian Space Agency began releasing satellite imagery of the Amazon at an unprecedented resolution. The stated purpose was deforestation monitoring, tracking illegal clearing operations that were accelerating at a rate that alarmed environmental agencies across 3 continents. What the analysts found was expected. What they found inside what they expected was not deforestation. In the Amazon is typically chaotic. Illegal clearing follows resource lines, river access, existing roads, mineral deposits. It is messy, opportunistic, and irregular, but embedded within the broader pattern of destruction. Analysts began identifying cleared zones that were none of those things. Geometric, deliberate, laid out in configurations that did not correspond to any agricultural, mining, or logging operation on record. Rectangles, precise corridors, circular clearings at mathematically consistent intervals. Some of these formations stretch across dozens of kilometers. None of them appear in any land use permit. None of them have been claimed by any known organization. Several of them are in regions so remote that reaching them on foot would take weeks. When environmental agencies flagged the imagery and escalated it to government level, the response was not an investigation. It was a reclassification. The satellite data was quietly moved from public access into restricted review. Researchers, who had been openly discussing the anomalies, stopped commenting on record. What makes this significant is not the deforestation itself. It is the geometry. Because when analysts overlaid the cleared zones onto the LiDAR maps of the buried cities, the alignments were not coincidental. The clearings tracked the ancient road systems. They followed the grid lines of civilizations that had been underground and undiscovered for centuries. Someone is clearing the jungle along paths that should not be known, along routes that were only recently found by academic research, and in some cases, along routes that academic research has not yet published. The jungle is being opened, deliberately along lines that were drawn thousands of years ago, and something has been moving through it long enough to know exactly where those lines are. Number 3. Things without names. The Javari Valley sits in the westernmost reach of the Brazilian Amazon, along the border with Peru. It is one of the most restricted territories on Earth. Entry without authorization from FUNAI, Brazil's Indigenous Affairs Agency, is a federal offense. The official reason is protection of the uncontacted tribes living within its boundaries. That reason is legitimate. It is also not the only reason. Researchers and field workers operating in the outer regions of the Javari Valley have filed reports for decades describing encounters they could not categorize. Not with uncontacted peoples, with something else, large, bipedal, moving through dense canopy at a speed inconsistent with known primate behavior, observed at distances close enough to rule out misidentification of common species. but never close enough to document conclusively. Indigenous accounts from tribes throughout the broader Amazon basin describe the same F-Igir across languages with no common root. Different names, identical descriptions. A creature that does not flee from human presence the way animals do. A creature that in several accounts appears to have been following the observer before the observer was aware of being watched. In 2019, a research team operating camera traps in the outer Javari perimeter captured footage that was submitted to FUNAI for review. The footage has not been released. The official classification assigned to it was not inconclusive. It was not misidentified wildlife. The classification used was a restricted designation that FUNAI applies to materials considered sensitive to ongoing indigenous protection operations. 3 members of that research team filed no further reports from the valley. 2 of them have not published since. This is not the part that is difficult to explain. Restricted territories restrict information. Agencies protect sensitive data. These are normal institutional behaviors. The part that is difficult to explain is the soil, because in several locations where these encounters were reported, locations flagged independently by different teams across different years. Ground analysis found the same thing: terra preta, the ancient engineered soil of a civilization that disappeared thousands of years ago. Whatever is moving through the Javari Valley, it is moving through ground that was prepared for it. And the civilization that prepared that ground didn't disappear the way we assumed. They didn't decline. They didn't migrate across the entire Amazon basin. They simply stopped. All of them at the same moment. Number 3, the Javari Valley sits in the westernmost reach of the Brazilian Amazon, along the border with Peru. It is one of the most restricted territories on Earth. Entry without authorization from FUNAI, Brazil's Indigenous Affairs Agency, is a federal offense. The official reason is protection of the uncontacted tribes living within its boundaries. That reason is legitimate. It is also not the only reason. Researchers and field workers operating in the outer regions of the Javari Valley have filed reports for decades describing encounters they could not categorize, not with uncontacted peoples, with something else, large bipedal, moving through dense canopy at a speed inconsistent with known primate behavior. Observed at distances close enough to rule out misidentification of common species, but never close enough to document conclusively. Indigenous accounts from tribes throughout the broader Amazon basin describe the same Efigera across languages with no common root, different names, identical descriptions. A creature that does not flee from human presence the way animals do. A creature that, in several accounts, appears to have been following the observer before the observer was aware of being watched. In 2019, a research team operating camera traps in the outer Javari perimeter captured footage that was submitted to FUNAI for review. The footage has not been released. The official classification assigned to it was not inconclusive. It was not misidentified wildlife. The classification used was a restricted designation that FUNAI applies to materials considered sensitive to ongoing indigenous protection operations. 3 members of that research team filed no further reports from the valley. 2 of them have not published since. This is not the part that is difficult to explain. Restricted territories restrict information. Agencies protect sensitive data. These are normal institutional behaviors. The part that is difficult to explain is the soil, because in several locations where these encounters were reported, locations flagged independently by different teams across different years. Ground analysis found the same thing. Terra preta, the ancient engineered soil of a civilization that disappeared thousands of years ago. Whatever is moving through the Javari Valley, it is moving through ground that was prepared for it. And the civilization that prepared that ground didn't disappear the way we assumed. They didn't decline. They didn't migrate. Across the entire Amazon basin, they simply stopped, all of them at the same moment. Number 2. Civilizations that erased themselves across the Amazon basin. There were once civilizations of extraordinary scale. The Tapajaj phase, the pre-Mara-Awara cultures of the river delta, the builders of the geometric earthworks in the southwestern reaches of the basin. Structures so large they are only fully visible from altitude. These were not isolated tribes. These were organized societies with populations. Archaeologists now estimate in the tens of millions. They are gone, not reduced, not displaced, not absorbed into neighboring cultures in a way that left traceable lineage gone. Within a window so narrow that, in the archaeological record, it registers less as a decline and more as a termination, the conventional explanation is European contact, disease, displacement, colonial violence, a catastrophe that swept through indigenous populations across the Americas in the 16th and 17th centuries. That explanation accounts for enormous suffering. It does not account for the timeline, because the collapse signatures in the Amazon predate sustained European contact in several regions by generations. Sites that show sudden abandonment mid-meal, mid-construction, mid-ceremony, as if entire communities stopped what they were doing and did not return, have been carbon dated to periods before any documented colonial presence in those areas. And then there is the synchronicity. Civilizations separated by thousands of kilometers, with no evidence of communication, no shared trade routes, no documented interaction, collapsed within the same generational window. Not the same century, the same generation. Communities that had no way of knowing the other existed, ending at the same moment. In the same way, leaving the same absence behind. No war produces that pattern. No disease moves that evenly across terrain, this fragmented. No climate event resolves that cleanly across a basin this vast. Something ended these civilizations simultaneously. Something that reached all of them, across every barrier the Amazon could place between them at the same time. And what they left behind, the soil they engineered, the cities they built, the roads they laid beneath the canopy, did not decay the way abandoned human construction decays. It was maintained, which means the most disturbing question is not what ended them. The most disturbing question is what has been tending to what they left for the 500 years since they disappeared. Number 1. Fae. The Amazon was never wild, Claude responded. The Amazon rainforest is not natural. The Amazon rainforest is not natural. That sentence requires a moment, because everything we have been taught about this place, its wildness, its primordial character, its status as the lungs of the earth untouched by human hands, rests on an assumption that is now quietly, officially, scientifically wrong. Botanists conducting species distribution surveys across the Amazon basin began noticing a pattern that natural forest systems do not produce. Certain tree species, Brazil nuts, cacao, afayafe rubber, appeared at densities and in geographic distributions that random ecological dispersal cannot explain. These species cluster along what are now understood to be ancient settlement corridors. They follow the road systems of the buried cities. They grow in concentrations that track, with a precision that unsettles researchers who study it closely, the boundaries of civilizations that were underground and unknown until a decade ago. The forest was planted deliberately, systematically, across millions of square kilometers, by a civilization that understood ecological engineering at a scale we are only beginning to theorize about. The terra preta, that dark, impossibly fertile soil found throughout the basin, soil that regenerates itself, soil that contains a microbial complexity we cannot fully replicate in controlled conditions, was not a byproduct of habitation. It was infrastructure, placed intentionally, designed to persist. And it has, for 5,000 years, the Amazon has been growing exactly the way it was designed to grow. The species are in the right places. The soil is maintaining itself. The system is functioning without the civilization that built it. Which means one of two things. Either the most sophisticated ecological engineering project in human history was completed so perfectly that it requires no maintenance and has been running autonomously for 5 millennia without deviation. Or it is not running without maintenance. The civilization that built the Amazon did not leave monuments, did not leave written language, did not leave burial sites or temples or the kind of wreckage that civilizations typically leave when they end. They left the forest, an entire living, self-sustaining system, encoded with their knowledge, seeded with their intent, and still, today, producing exactly what they designed it to produce. We did not discover the Amazon. We were allowed to find the parts of it that were meant to be found, the roads that lead deeper, the ones now being cleared along geometries that shouldn't be known. Those were not left for us. And somewhere beneath a canopy that generates its own clouds, beside a river that boils without explanation, inside a valley that governments have quietly decided should stay closed, something is still here, still present, still maintaining what was built. It has been here the entire time we were calling this place wild, and it has never, not once, needed us to survive. The Amazon is still growing. The Amazon is still growing every year. The canopy thickens, the terra preta regenerates. The species move along the old corridors as if following instructions written before any living civilization began recording history. The boiling river runs. The buried cities hold their shape beneath the roots. The valley stays closed. We have spent centuries calling this place a wilderness, a raw, ungoverned, accidental tangle of biology and water and heat. We built that story because the alternative, that something was here before us, understood this planet more completely than we do, and left a system still running in their absence, is a story that does not leave room for us at the top. The jungle does not need that story to be true. It has its own, and it has been telling it quietly, continuously, to no one in particular, for 5,000 years before we arrived, and almost certainly for 5,000 years after we are gone.